We have reached the end of the 24-25 campaign, and it's time for some end of season reflections and time for my end of season player ratings for Chelsea FC. There are some awkward kind of outliers here. Just to say very quickly, the likes of Renato Vega, Axel Disasi, João Felix, Ben Chilwell, players who either were here for half of a season but didn't play that much, and it's kind of weird to give them a full rating, especially when it's so clear they don't really have a future at the club. So I'm making an exception because Chalobah played so much in the second half of the season, so I feel like more appropriate to give him a rating. You may think that's unfair, but it's my ratings. You can let me know yours in the comments below. So we'll go from position to position, and I'll give you my rating out of 10. Obviously, the positive end to the year gives me a more positive reflection on a lot of these players. So there aren't many that are actually that bad, which is quite nice, right? We want to keep it that way. So starting off with the two goalkeepers, Rob Sanchez at one point in the season might have been below a 5, but I'm going to end the season giving him a 6.5. I actually think he ended the season in a really strong way, cut out a lot of those stupid errors. Does he still belong at Chelsea next season as kind of a permanent first choice? I don't think so, but he definitely did enough to earn himself some credit and help Chelsea get over the line on a big occasion. So I think that he deserves a lot of credit. I still think that goalkeeper position is one that needs to be upgraded, either by bringing back loan players. But listen, Sanchez, in terms of when he's asked to do the basics of goalkeeping, in terms of saving shots, in terms of commanding his area, he can be decent to pretty good, actually. It's the frustration that when he's asked to do the stuff that I don't think is essential for goalkeeping, or at least people think are so essential, he really fails. And I think that whether it was Maresca telling him to cut out that stuff, or just naturally him deciding to cut down on that stuff, it definitely helped him. Jorgensen, I'm going to give the same rating, 6.5 out of 10. I think Jorgensen obviously had some very difficult moments. It took him a long time to even get in a Premier League starting 11. And it was very difficult to judge his quality in the opening period of the season because he was only playing Conference League games. So Chelsea was so dominant in those. So it was always difficult to tell like how much is he being tested, even if he is making a few saves. Like, this isn't away at Anfield. This isn't against Man City. Like, this is still, very easy for Chelsea. But obviously he did get a run in the team post-Christmas, and he did make that terrible mistake against Aston Villa. So that's obviously going to knock him down. But I actually think in the closing weeks of the season, when once again he was kind of relegated to a Conference League keeper, he did make some big saves. And it's a bit like, you can only beat what's put in front of you. You can only save what's been put in front of you. And I think that Jorgensen deserves a bit of credit. What is the ceiling for Jorgensen at Chelsea? I'm not entirely sure whether he will be here more than a couple of years, but definitely more positive than negative. And it was all right in the end. He was part of a cup winning final and actually made one particular big save against Betis in that first half of the Conference League final. Moving into fullbacks, Marco Correa, very high score here, 9 out of 10. I thought he had a brilliant season. He was my second best Chelsea player in 24-25. It is remarkable the change in perception and thought and feeling and mood and vibe around Marco Correa. I don't think there have been many players in Chelsea, in my life supporting Chelsea, have contrasted in terms of such a negative emotion towards him at the start, where people thought he was a liability, you can't play him, you can't trust him, this guy's got no future at the club. Majority of people felt that. To where now he is like an essential player for Chelsea and for Enzo Maresca. He is someone that has been dogged, determined, confrontational, shut down a lot of very good wingers across the course of the season, put in some brilliant individual performances, but also has a knack for scoring some very big goals, which is a great thing to see from a left back. So I think Cucurella deserves his flowers. He goes off into the sunset, or release the sunset of America in the Club World Cup, as a really essential player in this Chelsea team. Reece James is going to get a 7 out of 10. Obviously didn't play that much, but actually in the closing weeks of the season had a big role as leader. The way he impacted things off the bench, you could clearly see that at Betis, but also in the final game against Nottingham Forest, leading as a captain. The cross, the turn against Man United was huge in the context of Chelsea getting Champions League football. Like, that game seems to be petering out, but one moment, one cross from Reece changed everything. And given the way he's been handled this year, very rightly by the club to kind of be hesitant with him and wait for him and kind of not be too hasty, given this is a guy who's broken down so consistently. It's just really positive to see Reece playing football again, a place where many of us feared we would not get back to in kind of a serious way. So hopefully that can only get better next season. Reece, at his best, at his peak, is a defining player for Chelsea. So it's great to sit here and see that he is playing football again and being more available for Enzo Maresca and seeing what he could become as Chelsea captain in the upcoming years. Malo Gusto is probably going to get one of my lowest scores this year. I was a big fan of Malo Gusto in his first season at Chelsea. I thought he was more than adequate cover for Reece James. He had to play a lot of football because Reece was injured, and I thought as an overlapping fullback for Pochettino, he also became quite a good creative outlet. But he is clearly someone that's just not suitable to play that inverted role, and it's a role and kind of a way of using the fullbacks that Maresca has never really veered away from. So I just don't know in terms of the future, long-term future for Gusto, what he has at Chelsea, if either Maresca stays a long period of time or we don't veer away from using fullbacks in this way, because it just doesn't seem to be the best way to use Malo Gusto. I think his all-round game has really regressed. Defensively, he's had some ricks, as we saw in the Conference League final. We had to be hooked up at half-time because it was so bad. It's a real shame, because I thought in the first year he was really strong. It seems like he's massively regressed this season, and curious to see where he goes next year if he remains at Chelsea. Josh Achimpong, I'm going to give a 7 out of 10 as a youngster coming through and getting some minutes. Maybe at times we would have liked to have seen him gain more minutes, particularly in the Premier League, but hopefully he's someone that's only going to get bigger and better next year. I think there's a real composure, there's a nice frame to him, there's a nice physicality to him, and coming through the club's academy, we know he can be a versatile player too, playing right back, centre back, even playing left back a little bit, even shifting into central midfield. I like what I see from Josh Achimpong, and there is clear reason why the club fought to keep him, and also why many other big clubs were in for him as well. I just hope we can utilise that a bit more now with the demands of Champions League football and needing a bigger squad. Moving into the centre-backs, Levi Colwill is going to get an 8 out of 10. I think Levi really came into his own at the end of this season. He had a really difficult time. I think in the early point of the season, he had a brilliant start from Maresca. From a creative point of view, from a passing point of view, he really was. I remember doing a show about it, like almost Chelsea's hidden playmaker. And even from a defensive point of view, I thought he had some good performances. The problem is, during that awkward post-Christmas period when Chelsea's overall form derailed, it felt like Colwill's did as well. I think probably as well not helped by his centre-back partner consistently changing. Fofana, then he gets injured. Tosin comes in for a bit. Chalobah comes back even earlier in the season. Disasi played there. Badiashile played there. I think the big thing for Levi next season is finding that consistent right centre-back partner for him, because the goal he scored on the final day, the way he's really commanded things a lot more from that defensive side and just being a lot more physically imposing, really taking a hold and command of the situation against some really threatening attackers. I think it's something as a player he needed to mature into, and I think this year has been a great learning curve for him, and to see him come out so positive is obviously a brilliant thing. So I think 8 out of 10 is a fair mark for him, because he's been through a lot, but I think most people agree in terms of his performances at the end of the season, which were crucial to Chelsea achieving their objectives, was obviously big. Tosin Adebayo is going to get a 7 out of 10. He didn't play tons and tons of football, but given this guy was a free transfer, and some of the ways I think Maresca shrewdly used his height and ability from set pieces in certain occasions, I think was very good coaching, but also for him to really excel in those moments. You think about the way he was used in the final 2 Premier League games against Forest and Man United, both teams with set piece threats that have hurt Chelsea in the past. I think that's something to really highlight about Tosin Adebayo. Off the pitch, he seems like a very likeable guy. He seems like a very likeable character. And because this squad is so young, has kind of been deemed an elder statesman, which is bizarre because he's only 27, same age as me, but it feels like he is definitely one of the leaders in this group, and someone that I think definitely grew as the season went on. So I think Tosin probably will stick around. I think probably is a decent, valuable option to have as a rotation. And as I say, from a free transfer, you can't really moan that much, because it's not like Chelsea paid 50 million for this guy, and definitely played a key role in some of those big games late on that obviously he deserves credit for. Whereas Fofana, I'm going to give, I was sort of torn, I think a 6.5, purely because he was injured, as again, it's a similar tale for Fofana as it has been for a number of times in his Chelsea career. He starts the year off very positively. He comes back from a terrible injury that kept him out all of last season. It took him a little bit to get going, but I felt as we hit October, November, December, him and Levi were forming a partnership. And Fofana getting out of the team and being injured again and coming back and then getting re-injured, it's just very hard to know where we go with Fofana here, because I think on the pitch, there's no denying he is a quality centre-back with great attributes. I think he's got great mobility. I think he's got good awareness. He's got great recovery too. And I even think aerially, he can definitely improve on that aspect too. It's just, if you're not fit, I can't really judge you consistently over the course of the season, and you can't be a reliable player. So it's why there are reports of if Chelsea get an offer, who comes in for him, I'm not entirely sure, but it's why his future is kind of up in the air at the moment, because he can't remain fit, which is such a great shame for, I think, what is a talented young defender. Chalobah, I'm going to give 7 out of 10. Yes, a bit of bias here, but I think Trev asserted himself brilliantly. The adversity this guy has been through in his Chelsea career is insane in terms of consistently being written off, banished from first team facilities last summer, to then playing in a European final at the end of the season and being a winner in that aspect. Trev is just so likeable, I think, in terms of his ability to respond to setbacks, to never doubt himself, and to also show a clear commitment to the club. Like, many players may have stuck 2 fingers up, and I think many of us would have said, fair enough, given the way they've treated you and looked for a new chapter elsewhere. He is committed to playing for Chelsea. He loves the club. He wants to succeed at the club. And I think it'd be foolish to let him go, because I think he's a Premier League quality centre-back. I'm not saying he's going to play every week, but he's versatile. And I think he's someone that also understands big occasions. I look at some of those late season performances against the likes of Liverpool that were huge for Chelsea on that day. You know, I think that he's a player that just, I don't see how it's not beneficial to have him in the squad. I just think you are shooting yourself in the foot, and as the club quickly realised this season, they did shoot themselves in the foot by letting him go to Palace. So I hope Trev finally gets a little bit of a firmer assurance that he's going to remain, because I think he deserves it. Badiashile is going to get a 5 out of 10. It's not that every Badiashile performance was terrible. I just don't see a future for him at Chelsea. I think there are better players than him in the current group, and I don't think he's ever got significantly better at Chelsea. It feels like he's been at this level for a period now, and I think it's probably time to call it quits. I know that the sporting directors like him, but I just think it's time for him, for his own career. I think it's time for him to move on, especially if you're going to still sign new centre-backs. You've got Josh Achimpong, who can play in centre-back anyway. If you're going to be going anywhere near a Branthwaite or a Mark Gurhey, then there's really no point keeping Badiashile about, because I think performance-wise, Trev's better than him, Tosin's better than him, Fofana's better than him on his day. So I'll be looking elsewhere. I know he started, obviously, the Conference League final, which was a bit of a shock. But yeah, Benoit Badiashile, I think this is probably the end of the road for him at Chelsea. Moving in central midfield, it is the player of the season, and that is Moises Caicedo. 10 out of 10 for me for Moises Caicedo. What an exceptional season, and what an exceptional player he has been for the club. Recovery, eating up ground, intercepting, tackling, helping other teammates, just durable, even remaining at a high level when the team was faltering. I think that is why Caicedo was so clearly player of the year, and proving why, you know, that money definitely feels like it was worth it. It was a ridiculous fee, and why many people will probably shoot down his credentials, because, well, you paid that much, he should be playing brilliantly. But I think anyone who's watched Chelsea this season knows the quality of Moises Caicedo, and also the excitement that comes from the future, where he's still a young guy himself. I think he's put in some really big performances against the likes of Liverpool, against the likes of Man United, and that Conference League final where he scored, you know, very much stepping up at the key point in the season, which, to be fair, many players did. But I think Caicedo, as well as Cucurella, kind of led the charge in terms of maintaining those performance standards consistently that I love to see in Chelsea players, doing the dirty work, doing the hard yards, but I think elevate the game of others. And I'm just very excited to see what an Andre Santos could do with Caicedo in the same midfield, what Enzo Fernandez can continue to do with Caicedo in the same midfield. That is something that I think for Caicedo, it just speaks volumes about his talent and his capability as a central midfielder, and everything we wanted when we signed him in 2023. So can't say enough more about Caicedo. I think most people will have him high in their rankings and ratings for this season. Enzo Fernandez is going to be an 8 out of 10. I was proven wrong by Enzo this year, and I'm happy to say it. I was very concerned in the opening months of the season about Enzo not really impacting games on the ball being sloppy, off the ball being overrun. But I think over the course of this season, he's very much grown into the role as kind of a leading player for Chelsea, someone that it seems like he's going to be in the spine of Chelsea's team moving forward. Some of the big goals he scored throughout the course of the season were huge for Chelsea. They really were. Even in games when Chelsea lost, I think of the Villa one, it shows his ability getting better of anticipating things, making those late runs into the box, being an attack-minded, goal-scoring midfielder, crashing the box. Those are big things. Those are game-changing things. I don't want anyone trying to demean that. Sure, he isn't a Cesc Fabregas. He isn't someone that's always the most flair player, but he can create chances. I think at times he's been let down by the attackers in front of him because he has created a lot of chances. And I just think from a spearheading kind of focal, obvious sort of game changer in Chelsea, which is what I wanted to see from Enzo Fernandez that I wasn't seeing in the first part of his Chelsea career. Undeniably now he is that player. He's here to remain, and hopefully he can go to the next level and make it a full good season of form rather than just, waiting until about November to kick into gear. So hopefully we will see that next year. Romeo Lavia gets a 7 out of 10. Lavia, obviously, again, another player, a bit like Fofana, a bit like other players that we didn't see much of this season, but when we did see him, we saw a very, very good player. Someone who, from a creative point of view from central midfield, can be, again, a bit of a game changer. I'm interested to see how the midfield looks next season. I still think there's a balance conundrum clearly that Maresca is trying to solve out, because even when he had the capability to do so, he didn't quite like playing Enzo, Caicedo and Lavia as kind of a classic midfield three, and then you've got Reece as a right back. I still would love to see that one day. You've got Santos arriving as well, and to see how that midfield balance works out. But I think Lavia, in terms of those line-breaking passes, in terms of his physicality off the ball too, I just hope for his sake he can remain fit, because you really do see high potential with Romeo Lavia. That's the huge thing, right? To actually play a consistent chunk of games, because that's how he's going to become as integral as Moises Caicedo. At the moment, there's still going to be that hesitancy and kind of trying to manage him. But undeniably, when I've actually watched him on the pitch, his fluid motion, his ability to play a pass that really breaks through opposition lines is a skill that you just can't underrate. You can't miss it. And it's something that you definitely want to try and capitalise and grow in the upcoming years for Chelsea. Finally, Dewsbury Hall, I'm going to give a 6 out of 10. I feel like I'm being quite kind to Dewsbury Hall here. He wasn't a complete disaster. It's just still the signing feels a very, very pointless one. I don't know what Dewsbury was brought to Chelsea that we couldn't have had from someone else. That's kind of my biggest criticism, is just if Chukwuemeka stayed, and the potential of Connie Chukwuemeka growing into an even better player. That's my problem with Dewsbury Hall. I think at times he's been a good soldier in terms of the Conference League, of taking up the bulk of those minutes, which I think we all knew he would get a bulk of the minutes. I think the most surprising thing is that he wasn't more integral in the Premier League, because I think a lot of us suspected with the Maresca connection, he'd be like a Jorginho. He'd try and help integrate this new system. He never was that player, which is quite staggering really, and kind of questions, was he really ever Maresca's signing to begin with, which is wild given the way we originally thought about that signing. But like with others, I think this is time for him to move on. For his own sake, he needs to go somewhere at this stage of his career where he is playing week in, week out. But he was part of a team that won a European trophy, so he was part of those celebrations, and hopefully for him he can go on and play for someone consistently, because he's not going to get that moving forward at Chelsea, especially with the way that midfield is going to look heading into the new season. Moving now into the wingers, highest score for me is Noni Madueke, 7.5. I think Noni had a really good season, strong winger in terms of just end product, getting a lot better, and also later on in the season adding another tool to his skill set of being able to move on to the left and look as impactful. I think that's a big thing I try and improve next year. I still think Noni can be a little bit selfish on the pitch. I still think he can be quite erratic. There are performances that definitely frustrate people, and I understand why. But I'd rather have the Noni that is trying things and sometimes trying to take a hold of a game, rather than a winger who slowly cuts back onto his, not favoured foot and kind of passes the ball back, just recycling possession, the kind of classic keep ball that I don't really like to see from a Chelsea team. So I think that Noni's definitely more of that explosive, taking on his winger and going inside and out. And actually, it was kind of obvious in the first year of Noni at Chelsea what he wanted to do with the ball. I think now he's added a few more things to his game that make it not as obvious for an opponent of how to shut Noni Madueke down, which I think is a real positive. Pedro Neto, I was really excited about this signing last summer from what I'd seen at Wolves, but I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. And I'm going to give the same to Jadon Sancho. I think both of these players have had their moments. Both of these players, I think, do have the capacity to go to a higher level. I just don't think we've seen it as consistently as we should have. And I think the problem is, moving forward, is like, will we see them go to the next level? Is this kind of their level now? Is Pedro Neto ever going to be more than what he has been for Chelsea this year? Is Jadon Sancho, if he remains, going to be more than what he was for Chelsea this year? These are not as young kind of raw players as some of the others. Yes, they aren't 27, 28, but they are players who have played a lot of football at this time that have kind of been seen as more mature in the first team and have actually been relied upon quite consistently by Enzo Maresca. And I think on both cases, people kind of look at them and go, we'd like to see an improvement next year. Whether from them personally, obviously Neto's not going to be going anywhere, I don't think, but Neto definitely needs to improve or go out in the market and sign someone else. I just think end product is the big problem here from both of these players, and consistency, really. I think, they are durable. In the case of Neto, I think a player that Maresca has relied upon a lot has worked his socks off. I think in terms of his application, his defensive work, I don't have many qualms there. It's more just, in the final third, for a player who's played a lot of Premier League football compared to others in this squad, I did expect a lot more and I didn't really get it. Tyreek George is going to get a 6.5. I think as a youngster, this was really his breakthrough season. And I think that, it wasn't quite as obvious a breakthrough season, but you think about the goal he scored against Fulham, one of the most defining goals of this Premier League year. And just speaking about Neto, obviously, who scored the second in that game, that right boot by Tyreek George is probably the most consequential of the season in terms of really saving Chelsea's year when it looked to be going down the pan. And I think, having to play centre forward, something that I don't think many of us anticipated at the start of the year, gaining a lot of minutes in the Conference League, hopefully for his confidence and belief and feeling that he's part of the senior group. I think the next step for him is to become a more reliable option, maybe shifting back into the role I think most of us anticipate he wants to play as kind of a consistent theme in Chelsea, which is on the left of Chelsea's attack. And hopefully that can be matured, developed, and he can gain more minutes. There still is a tendency, I think, where I think earlier in the year there was a desperation for him to score, and you see that in a lot of young players, but he is still very, very young, so you don't want to go too overboard and say that's a real negative. It's something that I think a lot of young players do, and from coming through Cobham's academy, his ball striking, which I know through the academy was a big trait of his, can we see a bit more of that next year? But definitely more positive than negative for Tyreek George this year. And we round out with the forwards. Cole Palmer is going to get an 8 out of 10. I thought earlier in the year he was going to be player of the year, no questions asked. But obviously he had that barren run between, just the new year and when he scored against Liverpool. Mad to think he went that long without scoring a goal. But you look at his performance in the Conference League final. I mean, just absolute insanity in terms of taking a game, a European final, by the scruff of the neck and completely turning it on its head. You see right there, those are as good as goals, like especially the setup for the first and second. I mean, you're literally putting them on a plate and changing the complexion of a game in Chelsea's favour to help them win a trophy. Palmer is a genius. He is a game changer. And what I'd like to see is a bit more of that freedom that he spoke about post-game that he likes to have. And kind of seeing where his positioning goes. He's very much been moved into a more central role. But later on in the season, he kind of found much more joy when he moved on to that right, kind of the pockets of space, either on the left or the right. And despite the fears over a sort of controlled system sort of pinning him down, it was quite ironic that the second half and the final half of Chelsea's season was him taking control of a game on his own and kind of exploding as a talent, which shows under Maresca he can be as good as he was under Pochettino, which is great to see. Hopefully only bigger and better things now that we're in the Champions League with the brilliance that is Cole Palmer. Nicholas Jackson is going to get a 7 out of 10. I think his actual endpoint of goals scored, and I'm really happy for him that he scored in a final, but obviously not where we wanted him to be this time last year. He had a really strong first season, in my opinion, and we wanted to see that only grow in the second year. Unfortunately, we didn't see that. He was injured for a period of time, so he missed a lot of games, but his petulance at Newcastle nearly cost his team very dearly. Missed a lot of chances. Aerially hasn't really improved at all, and it's why Chelsea are going actively out in the market to sign a new one or two new centre forwards, which I think is pretty defining. I do think with Jackson, the kind of question for his third season is if he's not going to be the main guy up top, can he move to a wider position? I think that's something many people have kind of theorised about. We've seen it very briefly at Chelsea, but obviously he did it a lot when he was at Villarreal. And whether that is where he can find himself a more consistent and permanent position for Chelsea. I think it's an experiment I would like to see before we start next season. Whether we will or not, I'm not entirely sure. But with Delap and probably one other striker coming in, for him to remain a first teamer, I think that's the adjustment that's going to come. And whether actually that'll be better for him, because his all-round game, I think his work rate off the ball, his movement, I think his link-up, I think there's still a lot to like about Jackson as a player. It's just quite clearly he's very raw, and from a taking chances and being clinical, he isn't there. And obviously Chelsea fans would like someone to be there who is going to take their chances 8 times out of 10, and that isn't Jackson based on his goal record. I don't think it's a terrible season. I really don't. I think, again, you've got to look at the number of goals he's scoring, even compared to recent Chelsea strikers, and it's nowhere near the worst. But obviously it's not at the level that is showing a player that's going to explode into kind of the higher echelons of the best strikers in the Premier League, which maybe this time last year, based on a really promising first season, we felt we could get to. And even the first half of last season, 24-25, where he was up to like 9 goals by December. Really, really good tally. But unfortunately, it took him so long to get the 10th, which is obviously concerning. Mark Guiu, I feel a little bit sorry for Mark Guiu. I mean, I'm going to give him a 5 out of 10. Purely because, again, it's one of these rankings where I'm like, I didn't see enough of you. You're still very raw. You need so much football and senior football to kind of develop into something. So it kind of feels harsh to kind of give him a serious assessment. And I think a lot of you will probably feel the same, right? Like I'm not quite sure how to think of Mark Guiu. I think there is a lot of raw attributes in terms of his pressing, his harrying, his work rate, and even a physical kind of stature that I could see developing into something more productive and more impactful. I just think it's good for him that he's probably going to be going on loan to the Championship for a season, because he desperately needs consistent football. And finally, probably the biggest disappointment of Chelsea's season, Christopher Nkunku. I'm going to give him a 4 out of 10. Just really, really disappointed by Nkunku. The first half of the year, he was scoring goals, and there was an argument that why isn't he being moved into a first choice player? But I thought some of the performances from him after Christmas, when he did get those opportunities, were just unacceptable. It felt like, it's always harsh, right? Because I don't know what's in a player's mind. But it felt like from January, it was quite clear that Nkunku had no future at Chelsea. And I have to say, just watching his performances on the pitch, you can make a very clear case that, yeah, that looks like a player who has no future at Chelsea. And for someone who I was so excited about when he arrived at Stamford Bridge, I was so excited watching his pre-season under Poch. Unfortunately got injured. The end to last season with Poch I thought was very promising. Heading into this pre-season, where again I thought he had some good moments under Maresca, and seeing what he could become, it's such a shame that it ends with him barely doing anything for the club. And that's just brutal. And I do think Nkunku will go somewhere and find his feet again. I think there's a very talented player there. But I didn't feel Nkunku was fighting for his Chelsea career. And maybe he had a conversation in January that made it clear he had no Chelsea future. But even from a professional point of view, I just was really, really underwhelmed by Nkunku. And I think for someone who was one of the older players, one of the prime players in this squad, I don't think he lived up to expectation, and why many people won't lose much sleep with him leaving, even though I do think the talent there can be very serious. I just think it's an indictment on his performances this year. So those are my player ratings. Please let me know yours for all of the players we spoke about today in the comments below. Follow across the socials at SonOfChelsea. Check out the rest of my postseason content and the transfer news and all that good stuff on the YouTube channel, on the podcast feed as well. And I will see you again very, very soon. All the best.